Hustle culture. Oh, I feel like it's gonna be so serious.
Why?
I'll try to
Lighten up.
dad jokes. Dad joke. Dad joke are funny.
How can I
The delivery is serious.
I was very serious when I said out that.
Hi, welcome back to another episode of Happy Hour. It seems like you guys really liked our previous career, like job hunting FAQs, so we decided to do another one, but more focused on startups, like how to build your own startup. So we'll start with the first question. Our co-founders will very kindly answer. So how do you begin and how much time do you need to invest in building a startup?
These are actually questions made by
My friends.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
our viewers.
fan base.
Fan
Thank you very much for the questions. No, it is a good question, and it's I think in previous episodes I already mentioned it took me maybe 8 to 10 years after I graduated to really think this through. I think to begin it has to be about your own kind of motivation. Some people say your own vision, but I like it a bit more grounded, like motivation and what kind of inspires you and what gives you energy. What do you wake up? I mean, this is a really like benchmark thing. Like, what do you wake up in the morning thinking about most of the time? I think that is a good benchmark, and I think that's where you begin. Your own motivation, what you're good at doing, what you enjoy doing, and then the third factor I think is whether that thing has a market or a business angle. I think that's the thing that people probably bypass the most, especially when you're young and you don't really know what you want to do, and you also don't know what the market or the world really needs in terms of a product or service. In terms of the time, I think it depends what you want to build. If it's a startup or a small business, it's different because the way you grow the business is different. But I do think it's something you need to fully dedicate to, because I always say compared to a normal standard job, the barrier of entry to creating your own startup is actually quite low. You just start it. You start a project, but the barrier of entry to succeeding is extremely high. I think it's much higher than a standard kind of corporate job. So it's something that you need to make sure you're ready to commit full time.
Another thing is at what stage of your life. That's also a determining factor. Like how do you begin, or how do you decide to want to start something or your own venture. Yeah. Whether you had enough of the corporate world, and also whether you find the right people to do this with you. I still remember that time when we were casually just having a drink at Brick House, and you told me about thinking of starting this WNJ Venture idea. And then after that, we had many rounds of conversations, and I think it was quite fruitful, I would say, those conversations. And finding the right people to do it with you, complementing each other's skill set. That's also important. Of course, some people would rather do everything on their own, but I guess different people have different style of approaching.
The team is important. You have to. It's rarely there's a business where you can just go about it yourself. There are
Depending on the scale of what you're thinking.
But most likely just for your sanity's sake, you need someone to bounce off ideas and bounce off emotions that you go through, and that's something I do think I personally do miss from having just a standard job where you don't have to worry about hiring the people. You just have a team. I mean, that's just the way the structure is, and you can then.
So we stop you from going crazy, basically.
Yeah. You need to find someone who stops you from going insane and managing the highs and the lows. So, I think that's really important.
What are your thoughts on the so-called hustle culture that is often associated with startups? And like along with that, like what are some of the romanticized aspects of running a startup? My friends have very enthusiastically asked like if the K-drama on Netflix, the really popular K-drama on Netflix right now, Startup, is an accurate representation of startup life.
Right.
So I can like play the clips first.
무슨 일이죠?
계약서 쓰고 있습니다.
네, 있죠. 근데 나는 검토했을 때 별 문제 없었어요.
보여주세요.
무슨 소리예요, 이게?
쉽게 가져갈 거 아닙니다. 이거 전형적인 에카이입니다.
엘크아예요?
그게 뭔지.
미국의 의판연구소의 실험에 따르면 아무리 일반성 쌍둥이라도 동일한 글씨체는 나오지 않는다고 합니다. 감사합니다.
Get goosebumps. I do, yeah. That's pretty good.
Well, yeah, so there's two, that's why, I say we're strictly talking about startups here. So businesses that are designed to scale and grow really fast because generally they're backed by investor or venture capital money or family funds or angels, but they're with a view of that company growing to capturing the most market share in that market it could in the space of maybe 3 to 5 years. So by nature, it's going to be something that is tech driven, and then you're going to be hiring a lot of people. You're going to be hitting milestones every 6 to 12 months. That's a startup. So that's not a small business. It's a small business. They start small. The startup can be small. A small business can be small. A small business, you're trying to strive for profit, basically from day one or month one. And you're looking maybe not to scale, but just to make a profit. So say a cafe or a bar or a restaurant, that's a small business. Unless you have a way to really scale that up, most of the time that's a small business. A startup is something like what they were talking on the show, which is an AI-driven solution that you can apply to a lot of different business use case and application. So that's the definition. So I think in terms of the hustle culture relating to startups, I think there is some element of truth in it because that's just how the strategy of the company will be run. As someone who might be joining one from an early stage of your career, it will be fast. You see a lot of, I think most of the time there's a lot of employee turnover and new people joining. Either people leaving or a lot of people joining, and that does speed up the pace of, I guess, what you do and changes the culture of your work environment. That's probably the biggest thing for someone maybe starting early. And then if you're a founder or if you're an aspiring founder, do be expected to change in other modes, because at the start you find that if you're starting from the beginning, you'll be looking for obviously the first validation, whether that's from an investor or your first business contract or your first user. So your mindset is really build a product very quickly, test it, refine it. So you're in a very product mindset at the start. But then when you move on, maybe once you have a nice product, you're really trying to scale it. So then you become in this sales mode. So your mindset has to be changed almost, I wouldn't say overnight, but over a very short period of time. And then if you get past that, if you're lucky enough to get past that, you become in operation mode where you're getting big, you capture the market share. Now it's about fine-tuning the costs and everything else. So your mentality kind of changes. And that's very unique, I think, to startups, because say if you're in a corporate job, your role may increase or expand as you go up, but your mindset doesn't change that much. So there's less element of that type of hustle. I think that would be my take on the hustle culture. What do you?
I think if you're passionate about a particular new product or service enough, you will automatically kind of become that hustle culture because you want to launch it or change your world as quickly as possible. But just hearing from what you said just now, do you think the hustle culture is also really, is driven by investments?
I think it speeds it up, definitely.
Because you need to meet certain milestone, you think?
Because you need to meet certain milestones, and the nature of investment is usually to cover a certain period of what we call cash burn. So basically, startups usually operate such that you're not making profit, so you're just spending cash that investors invest in you. And investors only invest maybe 12 to 18 months, so you only have that time to prove certain milestones. So naturally, then the whole everything in your daily work life is driven by this strategic kind of direction. So I think yes. So
and a lot of time, I think, is because you're also testing the way you do things in a new venture.
Yeah.
So there could be a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
So you need to like pivot fast.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. That's why you need to keep, hustling.
Yeah. I mean, they always say like, oh, fail fast, just learn from it. I think sometimes they romanticize the failing part. I mean, it's good to fail and stuff like that. I think failing is the starting point. But if you don't learn from it and then succeed, then there's really not much point.
No point in failing.
No point in failing, yeah. So I think that also is a fundamental difference to, say, a standard job.
Yeah, the mindset is so different, right?
You don't want to make a lot of mistakes if you're working in a company because they have a set rules and regulations. So I think that's also different. In terms of the clips that you guys just saw for the Netflix drama, I actually thought it's quite well done for a TV series, or for a TV series in general. Obviously, I think it captures it cannot capture the full details, obviously, of how it really works, because then it becomes too boring. It has to balance between the entertainment and the facts. I think it's done that quite well. Like the pitching scene that you've done there, I actually been through something similar like that, especially because I noticed the details, like especially when they have that clock counting down. That thing actually gives you the most stress, because you naturally like, I've got to finish with 0 left, because you don't want to. I mean, a lot of people don't want to finish like, I still got 30 seconds left, I feel like I should say something. But if you don't finish, then it's really bad as well, if you get cut off. So little details like that I thought was pretty good. She obviously did as I said, like,
it's through practice, right? Usually through practice that you can try to deliver the message you want to deliver within that certain time frame.
Yeah, I mean that's a skill, because you're facing an audience. You're obviously nervous because of all the build-up. You feel like something's on the line, so you only have one chance. You know there's going to be critical Q&As coming afterwards, so there's all this stuff building up.
High pressure.
So you give yourself pressure. And then you're trying to, I think the worst thing sometimes if you try to standardize a script and then just want to say it to the dot, so once you kind of go off it a little bit, you kind of throw yourself off. But once you really, I think, internalized it, is actually a very good skill to have. And just to be able to go up there and talk. I mean, you think about this stuff every day anyway, so it's almost ingrained in you. So I think that part of the show was really fun. The stuff that they show, I mean, for the ones that, without spoiling too much, but, what do they call it? The sandbox thing, which is an incubator, obviously is a bit, they show the really good elements of it. Like the mentors are obviously way more engaged in reality sometimes. They obviously have an easy journey because that's how the story has to go, but I think the small details like the contract negotiations and things like that, I mean, that's obviously, that's a pitfall that I know some people would have fallen into before. Acquisition hire, I think. Not specifically just that, but those kind of techniques where investors would
details in the contract.
Investors are obviously going to look out for themselves because they manage money for other people. I mean, you just have to empathize with that. And it's sad because that's actually, the pitching part is really the fun part because it's the build-up. When it comes to the contract, is when you succeeded or you had some element of success. That's when usually teams break up. That sort of stuff, because then there's something at stake now, and the dynamic changes, and a lot of startups don't survive because of that. So I think the show does portray the whole journey quite well, from episode 1 to I think it's 16, which is the last episode. I think it does it quite well.
Can I ask you just like off tangent a little bit? WNJ is not the first venture you built. When you were like signing contracts or agreements before, how did you analyze or study the contract? Because you never really had the, well, besides like, you know, I don't know, when you're like renting an apartment or like when you were like job hiring before, you kind of looked at contracts.
Yep.
But then when you're actually doing a business kind of contract or agreements, you never really had that experience before. How did you come about that?
Well, luckily someone became the interviewer. Sorry, get the fun and stuff. Yeah. I think luckily I looked at a few more contracts during my work because when we were doing banking, we lend money to people, and then there's a ton of contract relating to like loan agreements, collaterals, or security, etc. So it's I guess that was a good experience, and although I did find that when I was doing that, it was more like I would have to be more detail minded because my role was really to make sure there wasn't any loopholes, etc. Whereas here, I think I have to look at more the big picture because I'm making a decision. So I need to look at more the commercial and strategic elements first, and then maybe I'll review a little bit of detail and get someone else to look over other stuff. So yeah, I think the strategy is really to step back from. I mean, people get thrown off when it's like a term sheet or like a contract, and then you don't really know where to start. I think you just start with just the commercial terms. What are you trying to get out of it? What have I got to win or what have I got to lose? And those are always the benchmark. And then when you have those things in mind, read the contracts to see whether those terms are actually stipulated the way they should be. I think that's the small kind of framework I use to look into that. But have people help you. I mean, definitely have lawyers to actually look at the legal terms. And then just even if you have partners, again, that goes back to your first answer, the team. I mean, other people should look at it too. Even though they might not be, as in the show, there's a tech guy, but he should look at it too because it's relevant to them too.
It's good to have another pair behind.
Just to discuss it. And I think just in the meeting, you kind of get a sense of the person. I think that's also a good read. The contract is just an expression of what they want to get from you, or how they want to collaborate with you. So you can kind of get a sense just knowing the person across the table.
Yeah.
So Well, what did you think of the show? In relation to how you perceive startup or starting your own.
I actually watched 3 episodes so far. I think in these 3 episodes, they really kind of talk about the background and the drives of the main characters, why they wanted to build their own startup. And I think that was actually very, very inspiring and touching for me. But
that's the core part of it. They did it quite well to have a nice storyline behind the motivation.
But usually a lot of people in startup, they do have a reason. And I really admire people for that.
I think, it's because I think one of the things they write the motivation on the little cards. And the question is, I think I want to start a startup because...
in the fill in the blank.
That's actually a really hard question to answer. I was watching that show and it's like, I think I can think of a lot of answers to it. So it's about prioritizing which one.
Startups are often associated with younger people, i.e. Millennials and Gen Z. Do many startups you find, other than this one obviously, reflect this demographic? And if not, how do startups think about potential employees who are more experienced or advanced in their careers?
Right. Yeah, I think back to the definition, I think because startups are generally tech driven, and technology has obviously advanced very quickly in the last decade. So you do associate a lot of younger people are driving these are the computer scientists, these are the engineers. So I agree with the first part of the question.
With younger people.
I think a lot of younger people drive it. Obviously when that ecosystem becomes successful or publicized or profitable, then everyone jumps into it. I think that's the stage we are at the moment. There's some corporates that have started have startup exposures and older people like ourselves, I guess, jumping into this. We're still millennial, yeah. More experienced people going into it. And then I think that adds to it because then it redefines a little bit what a startup should be like. It's not just like, it's not just like in like we should show on the show. It's not just like a nice office with tables like move up and down. They have a lot in the show because I'm sure it's diverse. And table tennis tables and consoles and stuff. It's not. That's just.
It's like a Facebook office.
Yeah, I think the early successors had built that vision, and then it was spun by
the
media.
vision of free flow beer.
Yeah, that stuff. But I mean,
oh really?
Yeah. Just tap out. But I think it's changed now. I do think it has changed now because more experienced people, because just you mature as an industry. It has become. I think the most important thing is it does give employees a lot more freedom compared to a traditional job. So that's the most important thing. And everything else that manifests out of that is just a sub kind of sense, like a part of it. So I do think startups like obviously hiring more experienced people. I think the other way to look at it is whether experienced candidates will consider joining a startup. It's a bilateral thing because of the compensation, pay, pension, all the health benefits, prestige. I think it's a two-way thing as well. More and more, I would say people experienced are considering, have considered already because there are success cases you see or ex-colleagues jumping into it. I think that's a trend that's going to grow. So, which is good for, I think, grads or young professionals because they then also get a chance to work with, pair up experienced people. Then you can the best environment is to learn the best of both worlds, obviously. The kind of innovative, driven nature of a startup and the kind of business commercial maturity of a corporate. I mean, if you can bring the two worlds together, I think you have a lot of successes.
Also, just to add on to the younger people doing startup part, I think it's also because a lot of what would happen about maybe for the past 10 years, a lot of them started as bankers, and they kind of know how
financial aspect
the deal is put together. So a lot of them were sick and tired of that. So they want to do something on their own because they see so many people new businesses trying to have these kind of deals, and then they know that they can do it themselves too.
Oh, right.
I have a feeling that's part of the reason why there's a surge of new startups growing in the market. And also in terms of the more experienced people, I think they can still participate in the ecosystem by becoming mentors. Just like in the show as well. A lot of people, a lot of the older characters, they're not really part of the startup builders. They are mentors, or they work in the incubator to advise how the people without the business experience how to think in a more commercial sense. So yeah.
It's funny you say that because in the show they had this section where the guys from the VCs don't want to be the mentor for the program, and then obviously then one of the guys did because he was interested in the girl. But then he just palms it off to his staff if he doesn't like it, and then when he likes it, it's take off the top, let me go in there. There's a lot of those scenes in the show. So I actually think that's interesting. But then it's
take off the top.
No. They have a top that says mentor. So when they be
just
they want to change
hats.
He should be doing it, and then when he doesn't want to do it, he just palms it off. Because traditionally they don't want to do it because it's not related to the deal, and it's they actually mentioned that it's really painful because you're basically teaching someone who doesn't know anything almost.
Do they get paid for mentors?
I mean, most of these don't. I mean, I don't know about the show, but most of them don't. The only kind of upside they have is obviously they can filter the deals or scan for good deals early on, and then once you build a relationship, then you can invest in them later on when they're already. And that's the theory of it. I know a lot of people who don't like doing that because they go in as investors, they're not educators. So it's very rare to find investors who are also educators at a kind of middle, I'll call it middle management, sort of semi-senior level. Like the guys who are at the top really likes to educate because I think when you go through the whole process, you want to give back. When you're in the middle trying to hustle up, even as investors, you just want to do deals. You want to make money,
Right.
So it's always that. That's sort of, it's like corporate as well. It's always the senior management who spends time. Like I found it really surprising when I worked in one of my previous companies, and it's literally like the most senior people would spend an hour with you talking about just stuff, career, like life, like honestly, just life. I was like, they always like, wow, the most friendly people are actually the people who are most senior.
Or more what?
The most friendly or the most kind of approachable people sometimes in the company are the people who are most senior. And I'm working in a company that has it's not massive, but it has like 60,000 or 70,000 employees, right? So if you're meeting like basically the top 10 or 15 people and they are like super open, and obviously you can't approach them all the time, but when they give you 40 minutes, they actually give you a good 40 minutes. Whereas I think sometimes in the middle, you're thinking about other things, right? You're
thinking about yourself.
You're not as comfortable when you're not as comfortable.
Everyone's a competition.
Yeah, why am I talking to you? There's a lot of those things, and I found out I really dislike that middle part, but I kind of recognize why it was like that, and you can't change it in that system. So then that's why I think it's a good advice and you're really right, if you're a startup and you're young, do find a good mentor, because the fact that, like, despite what I said, I think the guys who, you can feel it, like the guys who put their time to do something like mentorship, and if you have a conversation and they're genuinely interested in who you are, that's a good start. Like those people are like really hard to find, so don't take them for granted just because they seem more friendly. Like a lot of people think because people are more aloof, they are more, they are better. But this is a weird mentality that I find. It's like the harder to get, it's like the more valuable. But actually, if you think back to it, like this guy is really approachable and he's just as smart, if not smarter.
Have you come across anybody like that in Hong Kong?
You mean like the mentor side?
Yeah, a good mentor.
There are people who gave me insights, but then I don't think it was more like a mentorship model. It's probably more like a sharing. Maybe it's because when I did my startup, I was already quite
like pep talk.
Old. Prep talk, but also just sharing. I mean, some people are really good at sharing.
Well, we're not that old, man.
Side chat with the grandkids. No, I think that I haven't came across a lot, but I do find inspiration in talking with people who've just been through. I value experience, and I value people who have experience but don't really use that as a point of authority. I like people like that.
Yeah.
They earn my respect.
I asked because I realized that maybe people in Hong Kong are not as willing to share. I don't know. I'm just overgeneralizing here.
No, I do feel that too. I think it's more of a social culture. Just this Hong Kong society in general is very much stranger danger. Yeah.
They think it's not a smart thing to do.
Yeah, it's everyone's out there for themselves.
Why are you sharing all your secrets to this person who can just take it to someone else? And, I never see it like that, but I can see why.
But that's the culture. The thing we learned in entrepreneurship class in MBA is that in this entrepreneurial culture, you should not be like that. Because sharing helps grow this business building experience or journey for everybody, and you must at a certain level already when you're comfortable enough to launch something. So it's okay to share. People are not gonna steal your idea or anything like that, right? So I mean, it's hard to say sometimes, but I'm contradicting myself. But sometimes I think it's good to share the knowledge, you never know. I personally would feel happy to see somebody successful, succeed as well. So I don't know.
Sharing is caring.
Yeah. Yes.
No, I think so, because I think people put way too much value on ideas. That I mean, a lot of people come up to me and be like, "Hey, don't tell anybody about this idea, but I'm thinking of doing this," and I'm like, "Well, I've heard this like about 5 times in the last like 2 months already."
Yeah.
Everyone has ideas,
Yeah.
and then the next phrase is always like, "Oh, it's the execution that matters." But I think people don't put enough thought into what makes a good execution. I think we should be talking more about that, to be honest. But people are quite, as you say, protective of their idea.
I do think there should be a balance though. Like I think yes, like share your ideas with people who you value like their opinions of, but also don't like tell the whole world. Because I think it's less so like someone will steal your idea, but more like the more you talk about it, the less likely you're gonna actualize it, if that makes sense. Like if you say it so many times, then it feels like you already did it, but you actually haven't done anything about it because you spent more time talking about it than putting work into it.
Do work versus think fair.
Yeah, exactly.
How much? Okay, just wait and ask the question. Weighing the importance of idea and execution. What do you think is the important balance?
You want a number? You want a number?
Imagine a pie chart.
Percentage in an Excel document.
You want it to 2 decimal points?
Just approximate.
That is a good question. I mean, I don't want to undersell the importance of an idea.
Yeah.
But again, the idea has to be, it has to fulfill certain, how should I say it, certain values. To give you a short, a little breakdown, I think a product and service has values to users and customers in 3 different ways. One, which is the way that everyone will think of immediately, is functional. What value does it add to me? And 2, I think there's actually a cognitive part to it. Like if something helps you to understand better, it's more like in the mind, right? So you might buy something because you think you learn something from it, for example. So there's that part, and then there's the emotional part, which is really big. It's like an example is, why do people always invest in restaurants? And restaurant is not a terrible business model, but especially somewhere like this. It's a tough business model. But a lot of people, when you talk about, I want to start a business, what are you going to do? I want to start a restaurant. And there's people, and that's emotional. A lot of it is emotional. So I think an idea has to encompass these things. So that's the importance of it. But I think, to your question, I think execution is more important because less people possess the ability to really execute successfully. Whereas I think reaching to a good idea, you can kind of sit in a table like this with a computer and come up with something decent. But to execute, you got to go out there. There's a lot of uncontrollable factors. You got to have luck. You got to have all these other stuff. So it's much more out of your control. So I do think it's good execution and putting the right processes in place to increase the chance of those uncontrollable factors coming to your favor is probably more important if that's how you define it. But again, just as a final comment on this, like as a young startup founder or aspiring founder, start with the idea, obviously. That's where it's the most exciting. But don't forget about building the skills to execute. So this is like communication, like stakeholder management, like just dealing with people. Even say if you're in university, there's loads of like leadership roles you can take up and play like something like sports and music where there's a performance element to it. I think that's a great learning because you know when you succeed, you know when you fail, it's very clear cut. So there's a ton of opportunities to practice those skills as well.
And well, just like a follow-up question, I guess we touched on it a bit just now. Like, how do you think startups can do, like in general, startups can do better when it comes to the welfare of their employees with limited resources as a startup, obviously?
Welfare.
Is this a question from you?
No.
You better answer this one.
That's true.
What is employee?
It's from my friend.
No, I want to hear your thoughts on this.
From mine?
Yeah.
What can startups do?
in general, not like this does not happen in this startup, but in general, I have seen like a lot of, unpaid or just unpaid employment in general. Like, and they mask it as like, oh, it's an internship, it's an apprenticeship. Well, whilst like I know that that's like it's tough. Like a lot of startups don't have a lot of starting money, so I guess but I guess just make sure that people who want to work for you are actually also like really eager and like do not take advantage of the unpaid aspect. So like, because I have heard a lot of my friends have been asked to do a lot of things that were beyond, I guess, the expectations of the job role. Like, yes, it's a startup. Obviously, you're gonna be hands-on with like a bunch of stuff, no matter what role you have. But I think just like as long as the employer is empathetic and doesn't forget that you're human too. Just don't overload your employees, like, especially if they're unpaid. Just make sure you guys are on the same page. Like if they're eager to work more, then yes, definitely like go for it.
It's also to the motivation of why, if you're taking on the internship, what's the, like we always discuss, what's the outcome that you want. So I know, for example, using you as an example, I know you have a journalist career path you want to carve out. So we try to obviously design a job scope to match that as much as possible. So I think that's something startups can be, when you're talking about welfare, like I think it's actually that's a big, I think of it as welfare, but it's the well-being for what you want to do. I think startups can obviously cater to that more than the standard job because it's more flexible. But then on the flip side, you're right, it's the hours or the working conditions can fluctuate. Just because it fluctuates for most of the time for the founders as well. So they naturally think, I'm putting so much time into it, you should be at least putting a certain percentage of time into that. So it is a dangerous pitfall. So I think there's certain ways founders can mitigate that. One is, I know it's nice to get free labor, but you should pay. Like that's we always discuss that. It's just not it's not going to be a lot of money because it's obviously internships and young starts, but so pay them what they should be paid. And then the communication, I think it's really important just to carve out like we do sometimes, just carve out some time to have a lunch or we're really unique because we can talk like this as well, but just to know hence José asking this question, just to know like where you're at. I think that's important.
I am very happy working here. Not just because
I didn't just pay you, right? I didn't just give you the check, right?
Yes, I just got my pay today. So last question. What are the highlights of your time as an entrepreneur and or working at a startup?
I wouldn't say pride, but like you would be very happy to start something from scratch. That's another sort of satisfaction you get that you wouldn't be able to get if you're working in a corporate.
What's the difference? To you, like for starting something from scratch? Is it just the feeling you can tell yourself that I did all this, like that sort of feeling? Or?
Well, for me personally, because I'm working in the family office, so I always had that mindset like, I'm actually just continuing something that my ancestors have built.
Is it like so you feel like a little bit emotionally detached from it because it lacks the element of ownership? Is that
ownership?
No,
a little bit, probably.
Okay.
And you know that if you and I believe that I have the capability to change the world. One way or another, and you realize that maybe the resources given to you in the family office may not necessarily be able to do what you want to do, and this way I have more control to deliver what I wanted to do.
Yeah, no, that's a good point because a lot of times people think, because you say you're a family business or you're a next generation entrepreneur, you get a lot of upsides, which obviously you do. You do get certain upsides, but I think there's which is why the reason I mentioned that is because that's the most valuable part of being an entrepreneur, a self-start one, is the freedom to do what you want. That's massive. I think that's just huge. That's probably the most valuable asset that you can gain. And for me personally, that's why I chose entrepreneurship. And yes, you lose the brand, you lose the structure, you lose the resources and all of that, but you do get to do things your own way, so you know you're accountable for all the successes and all the failures, which I like. So that's just the type of personality that I am. So that would be my highlights. Just every part of the business is a highlight, even the failures or even the hardship, because you're driving your own story. This is almost like you're creating your own story. It's a kind of creator mindset as well, rather than being just a character in someone else's story. I think that's probably one way. I've never put it that way before, but I think that's one way I would.
That's why entrepreneurship is not for everybody.
Yeah, exactly, and it's fine. I mean, it doesn't have to be. I mean, just back to the question that Renee asked is, it's romanticized, right? It's not. No one is saying doing a startup is a better job than doing whatever else, right?
It's choice. It's just a choice.
It's just there's certain types of people who like doing this stuff, and those people just happen to be a little bit more high profile when it comes to building their own success, because they have to self-promote and things like that. So I just love it when you can just go out every day and you meet people and you can say what you want. And you know, I love that feeling. I mean, that's freedom. So I think that's the without waffling on too much. That is the highlight of for me. So
Right. Thank you guys so much for answering very much in depth all of our questions on how to build a startup.
too much.
It's a 3 to 5 minutes per question. We went
I thought that was for her to ask the question.
It was being really slowly. But yes, let us know in the comments down below if you have any more questions that we haven't covered already. And stay safe and hope you have a wonderful weekend.